elementary school, I was a member of a Boy Scout troop at the local Presbyterian church. It was a great troop. Each month we went on a camping trip. Most of the time we hiked into the woods, but sometimes we drove there and just set up camp along a reservoir or something like that. One summer, we planned a fantastic canoe trip along the Asable River. To get us ready for that trip, our scout leaders took us out on some of the lakes in nearby Akron. They first taught us basic stroke techniques. They gave us demonstrations. They had us try it out, and then they set us onto the lakes. Down there, they're all man-made lakes, and they're interconnected. So we're on lakes, and there was actually a whole lot of homes around there. Then we'd go on to canals from one lake to the other, practicing our techniques. Just before lunch, we were just seemed to be getting things down, and we were heading to this public beach so we could get ready for lunch. When all of a sudden we saw this guy standing on the shore, frantically waving his arms and jumping up and down. We quickly paddled to him. When we landed, he said that a young boy had run into the water, had fallen in, had floundered, and then disappeared. We all jumped out of our canoes, and 20 young men, some of us still children, tried to do surface dives. Right there, right at that spot, was one of those spots where in a man-made lake where it gets real steep, and like within from here to Allen is 15 feet of water. We did surface dives. I couldn't even touch the bottom. I was pretty useless. Finally, some college kids came in. They started doing some dives. They pulled them out of about 20, 25 feet of water, pulled them to shore. A sheriff by then had come by. He started doing CPR. Somebody had gone down to the public beach and gotten a lifeguard. They came rushing up with this oxygen unit. The head lifeguard panicked. She put on the unit backwards. The sheriff pushed her aside, got another lifeguard in there. He put it on right. It looked like things were going pretty well. The child started vomiting. EMTs came by. They put him on a stretcher and carted him off to the hospital. You know, as long as that little boy was in the water, there was never any doubt in our mind what needed to be done. He needed to be rescued. We needed to save him. Unfortunately, there was kind of a state of panic. We didn't know what to do. We didn't have a plan. Afterwards, we talked about it with our scoutmaster, and we shared our fears, our frustrations. We shared the uncertainty that we felt, and that it was just kind of mass confusion. Some people tried to form a chain of people to go through the water to see if we could find them. Water was just too deep to be of any value. It's interesting to see how, when you contrast that, when there is a physical threat, when somebody's physical life is at risk, there's no doubt, we will do everything we can to rescue the person. But in spiritual matters, it's different. In spiritual matters, we're a little bit hesitant to interfere with a person's life, to force our way on a person. The Apostle Paul makes it clear to us in his letter to the Galatians that we need to be rescued from this present age. Over the next 15 weeks, we're going to look at the book of Galatians. And it is a book about how we are rescued by God. And from what we are rescued. And from what we are rescued. Paul is adamant about the idea that has the region of Galatia about in the middle of Turkey. Now that's rather interesting in and of itself. The whole area, which is called Asia Minor, was converted to Christ by Paul and other apostles early on. Some of their first missionary endeavors went into that region. That area is now 99% Muslim. Ironically, in my opinion, this shows the hypocrisy of the Muslim faith. They raised great objections for Christians coming in to their, quote, their country and converting people from Islam to Christianity. But they had no qualms about rampaging through Turkey 1,500 years ago with a sword and converting everyone from Christianity to the Islamic faith. Anyways, that's another story. I'll get off that soapbox, but I just had to say it. So Paul is very close to these churches. Now, we don't know whether the churches are in northern Galatia or southern Galatia. We don't know whether they're connected with Acts chapter 13 and 14 or whether they're connected with Acts 16 and I believe 18. Whether Paul went there on his first mission, he's writing to the churches he went to on his first missionary journey or elsewhere. It all depends on where you date it, and scholars get their PhDs arguing back and forth on it. But it doesn't really change the basic meaning of the book. This is one of Paul's first books. In fact, no, let me backtrack. This is Paul's first letter. He wrote this before he wrote any other. It is located after Romans and Corinthians because of the length of the material. When people ordered the books, they ordered it based upon how long they were, not necessarily how they were when they were written. For instance, if you look in the Old Testament, you have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and then the minor prophets. And if you look at how they're positioned based upon how long the book is. Chronology was not as important as verbology on something like that. Paul begins his letter and he establishes three important ideas. The first one is he establishes his authority. Now this is important because even though he converted all of these people to the Christian faith, it seems to be that some people came behind him, followed him, and somehow convinced the Galatians that they not only needed Jesus Christ, but they needed to continue to follow the ceremonial law of Moses, including circumcision. And somehow we believe that these teachers were either very well known or connected with very well known authorities in the law. Because somehow they undermined Paul's authority. They said things, they did things that somehow cast doubt in the people's minds. The same thing happened in Corinth and in other places. So Paul begins his letter by establishing that his commissioning as an apostle does not come from any man, does not come from a group of men. The people in Jerusalem didn't tell him to go, didn't give him these words to say. He wasn't instructed by a wise man whose interpretation he is simply regurgitating. His commissioning as an apostle comes directly from God. Now, for some, this seems obvious. For some, this seems unimportant. But to me, it's still very important. The first church I served as a student intern when I was at Gordon Conwell was an inner city church. But I said to the woman, well, the Apostle Paul, and before I could get past the words, Apostle Paul, this woman said, who cares what he says? He had such a low view of women. No one listens to him anymore. And I kind of stood there like, say what? You're an elder in the Presbyterian church? I was dumbfounded. But Paul's words are challenged today because of what some consider a low view of women. And so we have to reestablish the idea, the notion, that Paul was commissioned by God. Paul saw a vision of Jesus. Paul was instructed by God through the Holy Spirit as he studied. We'll later learn that he spent 15 years alone, 15 years isolated from the other apostles. And he pored over, we assume he had pored over Scripture, developed his own theology. That theology did not come from another man, did not come from his own conjectures. It came from revelation that God gave him. Paul reestablishes his authority with the churches of Galatia. The second thing Paul does is he conveys to them a blessing. He conveys to them his well wishes. And then thirdly, he tells them he establishes what God has done. Now these last two items are important and can sort of be taken together because Paul is about to say some things to the Galatians that are pretty harsh. The book of Galatians is Paul's harshest letter. He says things that you wouldn't say in public. He gets really hard-line with them. Now, have you ever been in an argument with a person who totally disagrees with you, and you have to basically tell them they are completely wrong? You know, the first thing you try to do is you try to establish some common ground. You try to affirm them in some way. Well, basically what Paul's doing here is he's trying to affirm them. He wishes them grace and peace. Now, in a typical letter of the first century, people would acknowledge the people to whom the letter is addressed, and then wish them physical well-being, would wish them good health and happiness. Paul does something a little different. He wishes them spiritual, psychological well-being, grace and peace. He wants them to know that their inner peace in life comes from God. John Calvin writes this about what Paul is saying. He says, Paul wishes for the Galatians a state of friendship with God. Along with it, all good things. For the favor of God is the source from which we derive every kind of prosperity. He presents both petitions to Christ as well as to the Father, because without Christ, neither grace nor any prosperity can be obtained. Now let me ask you, have you ever wished someone friendship with God? That's an interesting idea that Calvin writes. And Calvin acknowledges the idea that all good things in life come from God, that God is the source of all of our prosperity. That without God, we cannot have fulfillment in life. And that's why Paul will then go on to establish what God has done for the church in Galatia. He says that Christ came and rescued them from this present age. this is the only time that Paul uses that word rescue. And it is used in the Greek in exactly the same way it's used in the English. It's the idea that a person is saved from a life-threatening situation. And Paul connects it to this, what he calls this present evil age. Also, the only time that he uses that term present, associates evil with the present age. I think that that's a really difficult concept to think about for our society. I mean, we live in one of the most affluent times in history, not one of the most affluent times in history. People would look at, if you told people that they needed to be rescued from this age, they would kind of look at you with a dumbfounded look. We enjoy things that even royalty of another time period were not able to enjoy. Think about what we have. We have big screen TVs that allowed us to stand in front of them and cheer our hearts out. Last night, and as we watched Michigan defeat Syracuse, yes, I was distracted with other things. We can eat meat that has been grown in Wyoming. We can dine on vegetables and fruit that come from Mexico or Chile, depending upon the time of year. We'll put on clothes that were sewn in China, wear shoes that were put together from leather from Indonesia, and all of it can be delivered to our house in this brown truck that's powered by gasoline that comes from the Middle East. Think of the luxuries that we enjoy that no one else was able to ever have in the history of the world. Why do we need to be rescued from these things? I don't know about you, but while watching when the game was on, I was distracted actually by some other event that hit the news wire about the same time. And that was the news that Matthew Warren, Rick Warren's son, committed suicide. Rick Warren, as you should know, is a pastor of one of the fastest growing churches in our country. He was the author of the book, The Purpose-Driven Life. He gave the inaugural prayer at Obama's first inauguration. He is a leading religious figure. And so it is a shock to our nation, even to the world, that his son would tragically take his life. Why? Because his son suffered from mental illness. His son could never see the goodness of life. His son was ravaged with thoughts of depression and despair. And despite medication, despite counseling, despite all the prayers for healing, his son could never reach out and allow God to rescue him. You know, there's a lot of people like that. I would dare say that there are people in this congregation that at one time or another struggle with despair after Sunday morning. They wonder, why should I go through life? Why should I continue? What keeps me going? And they somehow just keep going from one day to the next. Maybe some medication will help. Maybe a phone call from a friend gets them through a day. But the joy of living is completely evaporated. There are more people in our society that are addicted to one form or another that you could even say we are a society of addictions. Some authors have even written that every person has some form of mild addiction in one form or another. It could be TV, it could be romance novels, it could be pornography, it could be alcohol and drugs, it could be something else. If we don't have addictions, we try to somehow satisfy life through activities. Think of all the people that are involved in extreme sports. People jump out of airplanes attached to a snowboard, doing all sorts of gyrations and configurations for thrills. People go on exotic vacations. They go on the cruises, and they cruise the Mediterranean. They cruise the Caribbean. They cruise around the lakes of Alaska in hopes of trying to bring some type of sense of fulfillment or satisfaction in life. Too oftentimes, people come up empty. The world is scarred by sin and the devastating consequences. And the real problem is that we are oftentimes blinded by this. We try to satisfy things. We try to gloss over. We fail to see that we are living in a fantasy in which we try to find satisfaction and happiness through glamour, wealth, power, sex. We prize those things rather than prizing gentleness, kindness, modesty, humility, servanthood. We don't really understand that this world is a barren wasteland that cannot bring us personal happiness and satisfaction. It's filled with temporary thrills and passing pleasures. This present age stimulates our senses, but fails to bring lasting satisfaction. I know all you Wolverine fans are living on cloud 9 right now. And let's just suppose that come, Monday or Tuesday? Monday night of the big game, Michigan actually triumphs over Rick Pitino and the Louisville Cardinals. And let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that you get to enjoy them cutting down the nets. How long will that joy really last? Oh, I'm sure you'll carry it over the next day. You'll beam with pride. You'll get to say, I told you so, to all of those naysayers that you had to deal with in friends or family. But eventually, the joy, the thrill of a championship will wear off. And you'll still be faced with the mundaneness of life. You'll still be faced with doing a job, getting by. Things like national championships, the joy that's associated with national championships, the joy associated with football victories or World Series triumphs, only lasts for a while. And that's what Paul is saying. This present age is evil. We need to be rescued from it. Not only because of our present state, but also this present age will lead us away from God. This present age will cause us to flounder in such a way that we'll forget about God. And we will not be connected with the joy, with the rewards that come from a personal relationship with God. And more importantly, just think of all the people that we encounter each day that have no understanding of what it means to be saved by the grace of God. After a day of canoeing, I went home and I insisted on listening to the evening news to before a commercial, an announcer made a comment that a young boy had drowned on a lake that I had been canoeing on. I went to bed with a really heavy heart. I was not a Christian at the time. I wondered if there were things I could have done that may have gotten to the boy sooner. I wish that was better at surface diving than I was. That maybe I could have went out into the deeper waters. As it was in my 85-pound body, I could only go so deep. There's a world out there that is drowning. There is a world out there that unless they know Christ, they will die in their sin and live eternally without God. There may be even people here in our sanctuary that just don't know how to reach out for the life preserver that God is offering to them. We need to be people that not only are assured that we are rescued by God, but we need to be people like Paul, who are willing to go out and see that others are rescued by the grace and peace of Jesus Christ. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God,